Hello, welcome to episode 17 of the series on Introduction to Programming. Branching statements and loops are common ways we make decisions when programming. In this video, we will take a look at different branching structures, such as the switch statement, to help us make decisions. Let's take a look. Previously, we took a look at different types of branching structures. We've looked at loops and we've looked at if statements. So, for example, if I have in here a simple if statement, document line x, and I run this, nothing will happen. If I increase this, so the condition is now true, it will perform the operation. There is a way that we could use a different construct to do this. In this video, we're going to be talking about the switch statement. So in this case, we change this around slightly. And we get it to do something along the lines of this. If I run this code, it's going to set x to 10. It's then going to switch on the x value. And what that means is it's going to take x and it's going to compare it to this value beside the case and before the colon. And so in this case, x is 10, so it'll perform the statement beneath here. If I change this to, say, case 11, and I run it, nothing will happen. And this is because it's doing a equality check between x and this value. Since x is not 11, it does not run this statement. Now, if I change this to then have 10 here, and I instead say document line, and instead of x, I'm going to write y, and I run this, it'll spit out y because x again matches the value 10 here. Now, we have looked at break before. There is another place we use breaks, and switch statements are where we can make use of it. So if I change this to 11 right now, and I run this, I'm going to say x and y. And the reason why it's doing both these values is x is passed into here. It verifies this case statement that says, oh, you're equal to 11. And so it's going to start execution from here, or start performing the action starting from here. And it's going to go and spit out x. Then it's going to hit this next case line. Well, it's no longer doing comparisons. So what it's going to do is it's going to skip it. And it's going to continue going down execution, and it'll print out this y. Right? I can repeat this here and say if I do a different case like 9, and I instead spit out y, put a z here, you'll see that it does x, y, z. And this is great because if we wanted it to do multiple statements, we can. Typically, we don't. Typically, we would want to tell it to break off of our switch after each particular case. In this case, I run it. All it spits out is x. If I change x to 10 and I run it, it'll spit out y. And if I change it to 9 and run it, it'll spit out our z value. And so this is a basic structure for how the switch statement works, where it takes a value, does a comparison, performs whatever lines you have following the case that it matches. And when it hits a break, it then jumps out of the switch statement and continues on, right? If I go down here and say, after switch, of course, I run this, and it'll say, is that after switch? One of the things that we can do when we're dealing with switches is to make sure that we are using an appropriate comparison. So switch statements, if I change these to be string values, it's simply going to ignore all of these when it runs because none of these match the type and value of x, which is the number 9. Right? If I change this back to be numeric, it will actually perform the final right here because it matches the value and the type of x. And this is called strict equality. So switches follow strict equality, and that's a very important thing to remember. Another thing that we should also keep in mind is, for example, I have another case up here. And this is perfectly valid. It's kind of weird. And what will happen when you run this is it'll spit out this first one. And so the other thing to keep in mind with the switch statement is if you are comparing a value, it'll always run the case with the first one that matches. So in this case, because this first one matches the value 9, it'll run this line, hit this break, exit out. So this last case here will never actually get hit. Typically speaking, if you have two cases inside of a switch with the same value, that is a kind of a programming bug. Typically, you never want that in real code, but it can happen. And if it does, it'll run and execute the first case which matches. Now, what if we intentionally wanted to do something if it didn't match any of our values? Say we had, 1, 2, and 3. If we wanted to do something, say, on every other case, we could write the word default here. In the default, it's going to do our default action. We can say ABC just to make this a little bit nicer. And if I put 1 in here, it'll spit A after switch. 2 goes B after switch. And if I try to put 3, it goes C after switch. If I put any other value, so 4, for example, it's going to go to this default label. So default is kind of like a case that matches any value. And so we could have it say, oh, error situation, because it was an unexpected value. All right, so we can have it say error situation and then continue running and do after switch. One of the things that we haven't mentioned yet is the fall through that you can use with the switch. So for example, say I wanted in all 3 cases to do a simple or common statement and then exit out. I can have all these case labels point to the same line here. So for example, if I put 1, it'll say it's a number. 2, it'll also say it's a number. And if I type in 3, it'll also say it's a number. Now, it's very important to note that if I remove this break here, it'll run both this statement and this statement. The only reason why it didn't before is because I had a break here. And so having the break is an important thing to not forget if you intend to only do what you expected here and nothing after. If you want to have multiple cases that all do the same thing, you can simply list them out here and then they will perform the action following it. You can get a little bit clever with this. Right, if I wanted to do something only for 1 or 2, and then I wanted to do something for 1, 2, and 3, I could do it this way, right? It's a number, but if I change it to 2, let's say 1 or 2, it's a number, right? So you can do more complicated logic with it. I would not encourage this because typically speaking, when you use a switch, you want to have a single value hit a single case and then break out and not do anything else. Having fall through can be misleading, especially if you don't catch it, right? If you have a break statement here and you don't have a break statement here, it can very easily get missed because it's optional, right? Maybe you deleted a line of code and you forgot that you had removed this break. It may go unnoticed that it's going to go and do, it's a number in case number 2, when really you wouldn't want it to execute this line of code when we run it. So there is another convention, depending on where you learned it. You may or may not see some cases written kind of where they all are on the same line, just so that it's very clear that you intended multiple cases to come here. You don't have to. There's no syntax reason why you would do it this way. I personally feel like this is a much clearer way to indicate that I intended multiple cases to do the same statement, but it isn't required. Additionally, if I remove this default, or I remove any actions from the default, this switch statement here, so 4, is the equivalent of this one. All right. If you have a default that does nothing, you don't really need to have a default because that's what it's going to do, is it's simply going to do nothing if it matches none of the cases. Some people prefer to have it here explicitly just to be clear that, oh, in the default case, I'm going to do nothing. I don't tend to do that, but I know a lot of linting tools really get upset if you don't have a default case in your switch statements. So depending on where you end up programming or what you end up building, you may or may not prefer to have it. I know there's arguments that having it means it's a lot more clear and more, it shows the intention that you wanted to have a default case, but not always. Anyways, this is Switch. This is how you can make use of it. This is one recommendation I have if you do want to use follow through, to make sure that you list out all your cases together. Switch statements are a useful tool for branching on certain values of a variable. They allow for a concise way of performing a variety of actions. In general, they are an easier to understand approach over longer if-else chains. Have a good day.